So the J.R. James Archive is the photographic collection of Jimmy James, who between 1961 and 1967 was the chief planner at the Ministry of Housing and Local Government, having worked up that organisation since the end of the war. Once becoming chief planner, he retired to become the department's first head of department in 1968, a role which he took for 11 years to 1979. He died rather unexpectedly in 1980, and he left his photographic archive nearly 4,000 photos to the department, all of which Joe and I have now digitised and scanned in, catalogued and archived, so they're now publicly searchable on Flickr.
They were found in the department, I think, by when Alistair Ray, a professor at the department, came to the department. He found them in his office, just in the corner. I think they were then, he looked at them and thought, what are these? And then he did a bit more research around them and found that they were donated in his will to the department when he passed away in 1980. And they'd just been sat in the department in various places ever since. So they were moved to a store cupboard, and then 10 years later, the alumni fund were good enough to give us some money to then catalogue them, and that's what we were doing this summer. There's a variety of things. It's pretty much anything you could think of, from diggers in Matlock to post-war redevelopments, lots of things from new towns like Harlow, Cumbernauld, other places, lots of places that were particularly bombed in the war, places like Coventry that were entirely redeveloped. He was kind of in charge or involved with these developments, and basically he just photographed them as kind of not so much of a before and after, but more of like a catalogue of how the place had developed. And then he'd probably use them in lectures for students or for other politicians, or for even in other countries. There was evidence of something that looked like he'd delivered a lecture in Tokyo regarding something like the best and the worst of town planning in Britain.
I think also there's one or two things as well as sort of around the history of planning that he would teach as a module in the department here. So there's one or two things that as two students who just graduated this summer we sort of recognise from some of our own lectures, and here are those same things being taught. The history of town planning, obviously that hasn't changed, and that being taught in the department in the 1970s rather than in the 2000s when we were here.
Yeah.
I think it's of great significance really, because town planning was a big thing in British society in the 1960s when he was chief planner. And it's his personal collection as chief planner of those changes taking place, of him being taken around the development corporation, being shown the new towns, being shown the sort of the progress of our major cities being rebuilt after them being bombed out in the war. I think also more important than that though, that's perhaps the town planning interest. I think they're probably of interest in most of the general population, because they represent an era sort of 50, 40 years ago when there's lots of familiar things, lots of people that can remember that era. And it might be a bit of a trip down memory lane of times that have bygone, and you might revoke a few memories. But also, it's people around now sort of saying, you'll recognise a few places that are very similar but not quite the same. So it's really quite nice.